Welcome to the Divorce Game. I am your host, Pamela Elaine Nichols. In every game, there are winners and there are losers. However, there is one game in which one side typically loses more than wins. Children of divorce are unknowingly players in a game where the rules are made up by their parents. Sometimes parents play fairly and sometimes unfairly. Either way, children suffer emotionally, mentally, financially, and socially. This show gives adults who were once children of divorce an opportunity to educate parents about the impact of their game and offer them new rules so children can win. The name of today's divorce game is Unwilling Communicators versus Messenger Kids. Here to describe this game and set new rules is my guest, Julie Palumbo. Julie is a certified health coach and owner of Best Whole Self LLC. Welcome, Julie.
Thank you, Pamela.
I'm so glad you're here with me.
Thank you. I love being here.
Yes. So I have to tell the audience before we get into some of the questions about this game. I have to let you know that I met Julie about 4 or 5 years ago when I was fresh out of divorce. And it was a difficult time for me. And I watched Julie sit on a panel of other experts. Julie's background is as a certified divorce financial analyst. And she sat on that panel and she said a lot of important things about divorce, what it means to set your finances when you're going through divorce, and all of those important things to consider. One thing she said that stood out to me that really hit me upside my head that I never had considered. She was asked some question about her parents' divorce, and I remember Julie saying, what I wanted was to not know what my parents were talking about and what they were going through. I just wanted to be left out of it. And that struck me as, wait, you wanted to be left out of it? Didn't you want to be a part of it to know what was going on? And didn't it matter? But it didn't. And in fact, it had an impact on her. So Julie, you have challenged me in that comment to rethink how I talk about divorce, talk about my children's father in front of them. I really had to take a hard look at how I communicated about divorce with my kids. So I want to thank you for that. I don't know if you had any idea.
Oh, you're welcome.
The impact of that on me.
I didn't, but I'm so glad to hear that. Thank you.
Yeah. So let's talk about this. So first, tell us a little bit about your parents' divorce and how old you were, and were there other siblings involved?
Sure. So I was 5 years old, and I have an older sister who was 8 at the time. Okay. So we were quite young when they got divorced.
Yeah. So how long were your parents married?
At the time, they were married 15 years.
Wow.
So it was, still kind of, I feel like, and based on my past career, I do feel like that was a sweet spot of times for people to get divorced in that 15 to 20 year range. So it was pretty common, I guess.
So we talked a little bit about this before coming on the show with me today, and you shared with me how your parents were unwilling communicators and you and your sister were the messengers. Can you tell us what that was like, and could you give us a really specific example of you all being the messengers? Sure.
So I think because we were so young, they constantly had to communicate, which was a good thing. However, this was back in the early 90s before text messaging and things like that. So the communication modes were a little different. However, the same thing remains true, and I still see it today, that a lot of parents use their children to communicate back and forth. So one example would be holidays, which for any child of divorce, that is just a nightmare. And it does not get easier as you get older, which I think a lot of people misunderstand. So as a child, though, it was all about what time. We were young, we weren't driving, so it was what time is one parent picking us up from the other parent's house and dropping us off. Yeah. And instead of them communicating the times, it would be through us. Tell your mom, I'm picking you up at this time. Then mom would say, that's too soon. I want you for more time. Tell dad he has to wait an hour, whereas they could have just communicated that together. Why did we have to hear this back and forth? It would have been so much more efficient, first of all, to pick up the phone and call and say, hey, this is what time. If they needed to negotiate different times, that would have been great. Leave my sister and I out of it, because from a child's perspective, we wanted to spend time with both parents.
Of course.
And it made it seem like we wanted to spend more time with one over the other. Yeah. Whereas that wasn't true. And at 5 and 8 and all the way up until 16, before we were driving, we really had no control over what time we were picked up and dropped off. So knowing that component, that it was stress on our parents about how much time we were spending with each one, that being with one was upsetting the other, really put a lot of guilt on us because we just wanted everyone to be happy. So it would have been a lot better had we not even heard the conversation and just been told, you're getting picked up at this time and dropped off at that time.
Well, the first question that comes up for me with that story, Julie, is did you all get that stuff wrong sometimes? Did Mom said this, but then by the time you told Dad, it was a whole different story?
Yes, like the game telephone. It was, I don't think it was as much as being incorrect as just being stressful. And it was honestly like we were the middlemen negotiating back and forth, whereas it could have just been a direct conversation that would have saved a lot of time and confusion. And, I think too, as a child, you want to please. So there may have been times where we kind of did change the wording to not be as maybe direct or harsh. Okay. Just because we, again, want to please. So I'm sure if they spoke directly, the conversation would have been gone a little bit differently. So I think that, it's not as consistent as if it were just parent A to parent B.
All right. Now that you're older and you can look back on that experience with a lot more insight than you could at the time, why do you think your parents, other than they probably didn't like each other, hello, but why do you think they didn't communicate directly with one another other than, well, we just don't like one another? Why do you think they did that?
That's a really good question. And I honestly have no idea, other than the fact that I think that it just made it easier for them to talk to us rather than each other, like you said. And in the beginning, when we were 5 and 8, the divorce was fresh. Now I'm 33, so this was many, many years ago. But it's still maybe easier instead of picking up the phone. Again, there was no, maybe text messaging would have been easier, but maybe instead of picking up the phone, it just would have been, when you see Dad, tell him this, or when you see Mom, tell her that, as opposed to taking that initiative themselves. Maybe they even, and knowing my parents, they probably didn't even realize they were doing it. Yeah. It probably was just something to say without thinking of the consequences. And as you mentioned, we were so young, and now that we're older, we could reflect on it. We didn't know enough to say we don't like that. So it kind of just was, well, this is how it's always been, and this is how it's always going to be.
I'm glad you said that, because we could look at this as, well, the parents just wanted to throw the kids in the middle of this, right? We could go there. But I like the fact that you said maybe they had no idea. And that's why I think this show is so important, because parents aren't aware, too often aren't aware, that their actions and their decisions have a huge impact on their children. They're just not, it's a blind spot, so to speak. So let's talk about the impact of their not knowing that they were affecting you and your sister. I know your sister isn't here, but if she were, what would she say? What do you say about the impact at that time, Julie, and now that you are a wife?
Yes.
And a mommy.
Yes.
A new mommy.
Yes. I think looking back, it caused stress, as I mentioned, because we just wanted to please both parents, and they never made it seem like we were choosing one over the other. However, as a kid, you kind of internalize that, and we knew that we weren't the reason for divorce, and all that parents tell you, but you do kind of feel like you're hurting the other one's feelings, even though they're probably upset at the other spouse. It does come across, or like as a child, you can't really realize who they're really upset with. All you know is they're upset. It's Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever, and we're upsetting them because we're spending more time with the other. And then we're constantly watching the clock. And now as an adult, I realize maybe I wasn't as present with whoever parent I was with at the time.
What do you mean? Speak about that.
So I feel like a lot of times I would have been nervous that I was spending too much time, or we had to be home by a certain time, or we had to be with one parent by a certain time, and it kind of took away from the experience as it was happening. Now, as a child, I don't know how to say I'm not being present. You know, I'm not fully enjoying this experience. But and this is what I used to tell parents when I was a CDFA, was that, you know, it's not the quantity of minutes.
And let's just tell everyone again what a CDFA
I'm sorry,
is.
It is a Certified Divorce Financial Analyst. I would tell them it's not the quantity of time together, it's the quality of time together. So now that I'm 33, long moved out of the house, moved out of the area, as you said, I'm a wife and a mother myself, I don't look back and say, well, I spent X amount of hours with mom and X amount of hours with dad, so I have a better relationship with one or over the other. That has nothing to do with it. So if I were telling parents advice now, I would say don't fight over 1 extra hour here or there.
Oh, wait, you got to say that again, because that is such an unnecessary fight. Say that again, please.
Do not fight over that extra hour.
Like, is it a big deal?
It's not. It's not. And I think it's the principle of the fact, just like, you know, when people are dividing their assets, they just have to fight over the china. That really means nothing because it's the principle of the fact. But the time spent with your child is the most important. And if you spend an hour of that time talking badly about your spouse or giving them trouble about how long they're spending with one over the other, you're losing precious time. You may as well have given up that hour. So it's so much more about the quality. And whichever parent has the least resistance, I think, naturally will have a better relationship, at least when the child is younger, because then they'll be more at ease with them and not feel so pressured to be in, like, you know, essentially clocking in at a certain time and clocking out.
Yeah. So are you saying that in a way you were watching the clock?
Yeah.
When you were with one parent, because like, oh, in 5 hours, I mean, you know, you're young, but at some point in time you could understand time. But soon it's going to be time to switch.
Yes.
So you couldn't really enjoy mommy's time or really enjoy time with dad in the way that you could have because you were, so this is a consequence of the parents not really communicating with one another because you're not enjoying the time that you could have otherwise.
Right, because I know the behind the scenes, and I did not have to know the behind the scenes. Now, if I had known that we were leaving at noon and it was quarter of, and I thought, okay, I'm leaving in 15 minutes, okay, that's fine. But I wouldn't have known the emotional attachment to it. And granted, I'm not saying every time was like this. You know, there were plenty of times that either way I was totally fine, but it happened enough. And like I mentioned, I think holidays are the biggest time to really notice that, that I would just feel conflicted and constantly watching the clock. Like, I hope the other parent isn't upset that we're still here. And again, I wasn't driving, so the power was really in the parent or whomever was driving us to and from. So that was also another issue.
Well, were your fears founded, like once you left dad, let's just say, and it was time to go to mom, did you find mom was a bit upset that you maybe didn't come back at the right time, or that your hair was messed up when you arrived, or you still have on the same clothes you had on when she dropped you off? Like, did you encounter anything like that with either parent?
I feel at times there could have been a, you know, I only saw you for X amount of hours and you already have to leave kind of thing. But again, that was not on me. Trust me, if I had to choose, and if you ask any child of divorce, if they had to choose, they would spend all of their time with both parents. So that is something that I, to this day, still remind my parents, you know, we have to split our time. We don't want to, we have to. So now that we're adults, obviously the conversation's a little different, but it is still so much out of our hands that I just wish that it didn't even have to be a conversation.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to go a little bit more personal, if it's okay. And if it's not, you just tell me. But okay, so you are now married over a year. Before you even met your beloved, did you have thoughts in your mind or any fears or concerns about who you might be in a relationship as a child of divorce?
It's funny, and I haven't. I always kind of thought in the back of my mind that what my parents' marriage was like was not a reflection on what my marriage would be like. And I almost used it as a way of saying, I don't want to be like this. Now, you can't control everything, but I really, and when finding a partner, I tried to find someone whose values and ideals were similar to mine. And again, you know, you don't know what happens in the future, but I never made it a point of pause for me in finding my
Really?
life partner. No, I really didn't. And
You brought some real self-awareness. You must have done a lot of self-reflection. It sounds like you did.
yeah, I do think that I took my time, and you know, I didn't get married until I was 32, so I really was waiting for the right time, the right person, and you know, again, you can't control the future, but I know what type of a partner I am and what I look for in my husband, and I just don't think that it's a reflection. Also because both of my parents' were married, so to each other for years, their whole life. Well, you know, my parents' whole life. So if you were to say, well, then it's, you know, it's kind of like a pattern. Well, their parents weren't divorced and my parents were. So that really doesn't mean that I'm necessarily going to be divorced or not. So I just never thought it was indicative of what my future relationship would be like.
Now, you're married. That means you had a wedding. Did both your parents attend the wedding? And how was that? Did they say to you to go tell your dad?
No, I think we're mostly past that by now. Thankfully for group texting, you know. Actually, both parents walked me down the aisle, and beautiful. You know, like I said, it's been many years, so we're pretty much over all of that unnecessary drama. And it, you know, and I tell this to people all the time who are going through divorce. I say, you may no longer be husband and wife, but you are still mom and dad. Absolutely. And that does not change. And no matter what one spouse says about the other, from a child's perspective, it's still mom and dad. You only get one. So for you to say something bad about my mom or about my dad, then it's still hurtful to me, because I mean, I don't care what you're like as a husband or wife. I care what you're like as a mom or dad. So when you're transitioning through life and having all these big life events, keep that in mind, because just because you're divorced doesn't mean that your life ends together, especially if you have children. So it was, you know, from age 5, it was graduations and going to visit colleges, and then marriage, and then sitting in the waiting room together when I had my child last month, you know, so it's never ending. And I like to make sure that people who divorce understand that, because little things could come in the way of big things that you don't want to be ruined in your life. Yeah,
and you know, a way that I've been starting to look at this, you know, I've been divorced for 6 years. We have 4 children between us, is how can my children, it's not their responsibility to make the relationship between mom and dad better, but how can what they're going through, the ups and downs and the great things, the accomplishments, bring dad and me together in a way that's cordial, if that's all we can do, or a way that's respectful if we can go to a higher level, or a way where we appreciate one another if we're really evolved. But the children have such an important role to help parents have a better relationship with one another without being directly responsible for that. Right. What do you think?
I completely agree. And I think that, you know, in the beginning when we were so young and my parents divorced, I liked that they had to have communication with each other, and they had to stand with each other at our track meets and dance recitals and everything. And it kept, we were still a family, you know, and that does not change. You're still the same core 4 no matter what. You know, even now we still have pictures of the original 4, and that will never change. So I feel like to your point, you know, about bringing the family together, I think that it's important, not that we're responsible, but I think it's nice to include, and like I mentioned, group texting. You know, if I send a picture of my child, obviously, you know, as grandparents, they both want to see this, so why not? You know, we could all be in a conversation together. And you know, I'm not writing them a holiday card titled to mom and dad, but I'm able to include them together on certain things, and I like that.
So up until what age, like when were you and your sister emancipated from being messenger kids? What do you remember?
It still happens from time to time. Again, I think just out of habit, you know, like just tell him or tell her kind of thing. But truthfully, I moved away to go to college when I was 18, and I think things started really to shift then, because...
And your sister had already been gone because she's 3 years older than you.
Yes, yes. So that was, once we were out of the area, it was a little bit easier. And, you know, you become adults too. And even though at 18 you're an adult, I really think it's till like you officially leave the home that you have that power to kind of be in control.
Yeah. Okay, so I know that, let's go back a little bit, because I know that there was stress when you were going through this. But what was it once you were 18 and out of the house? Did you have any residual emotional experience around being the messenger kids when your parents were?
You know, I think I actually used it to my advantage. And
how so?
Just any time in life now, I understand, you know, just speak to the person directly. It is way more efficient, and you don't have to involve people to... I feel like you're just getting your feelings hurt. You know, if I, even in a work situation, you know, if I wanted you to tell so-and-so something on my behalf that would maybe put you in an uncomfortable situation, I would think twice about it and just do that myself. You know, I really try to use things like that to my advantage. And I look back on it just as, you know, we're a product of divorce. This is pretty much par for the course of how things go. And, you know, maybe at times it wasn't great, but this is kind of just how, like, a pattern I think that people follow. And if I could use it then to help others not do it, then that's beneficial. But I never held a grudge or resentment or anything in that way. It was more like, okay, how can I not do this in my own life? You know, and how do I avoid that middleman?
Would you say, Julie, that your sister looks at it the same way, or does she have a different experience than you?
I think she has the same experience as me. I mean, she's been married. She's only 3 years older than me, and she's been married 11 years.
Oh, wow.
Very, like, you know, solid relationship, has 2 kids of her own as well. So she never let it deter her. She also uses the communication now as a strength, because we saw what happens when you don't. And I think keeping communication open is absolutely huge. And it's one of those things, if you don't say it when it's pressing or an issue, then you never say it, you know? So don't wait until you have someone else to relay the message because it's easier. Or now in today's day and age, you're hiding behind a text message. You know, if you need things to iron out between someone, just talk to that person.
And I think, you know, I'm going to step into the place of having been the one who says, tell your dad this. You know, part of it, if I'm going to be honest with myself, part of it was, there were 2 parts to it. Part 1 was, I really don't want to talk to him. Okay? I don't want to talk to him. And the second was, I don't know how to say what I need to say in a way that's not hurtful, in a way that's not harsh, you know, like, should I care? But yes, I cared. So I didn't really know how to say without it being a back and forth confrontation and nasty or unkind. So it was easier, as you said earlier, to just say, okay, Taylor, tell your dad X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
I mean, what do you feel about that?
Well, no offense, but it would have been better off for you to have the uncomfortable conversation with your ex than to involve your children, because maybe his words that he wanted to say to you, he really said to your children, so they had to internalize that negativity. Also, they had to hear negative things about their mom, or they had to hear negative things about their dad. And again, we do not care really what happened with the marriage while you're not together. We just care that you love us and we love you, and we want to make everyone happy. And by we, I mean children, regardless of how old you are. So I think that sometimes, I know that it is hard to have that conversation, and it is easier just to say, tell your dad, but I mean, you have to think about, okay, if I tell them, and maybe, and again, like I go back to, maybe you don't even realize what's happening, you know, or how the child feels hearing that.
Yes, well, we know it's a big impact. For sure. Yeah,
so it's not like you're doing it intentionally. Like, how am I going to make my child's day miserable? It's just kind of an easier thing to do and to relay. And sometimes it would come out that the other parent would say, okay, you know, like, it wasn't always an argument. You know, it was just, I didn't have to know the behind the scenes of anything. And this is, I mean, I'm talking about one specific example here, but this could go across for so many other things relating to children and communication between parents. They don't need the back and forth. They don't have to know.
Do you think it would be worthwhile if parents recognize that they did this? It's after the fact, okay, like in your case, it's after the fact. But if they said, maybe they have done this, so I'm making an assumption, but I'll go ahead with the question.
Yeah.
They said, you know what, Julie and whatever your sister's name is, we really want to take responsibility for all the times we made you the messenger kids, because we know that that's something you didn't want to know, you didn't have to know, it had some effect on you, it caused unnecessary stress, and you were time watchers when you could have been enjoying being with us. Would that make any difference?
No.
No!
No, it's in the past. It's.
Oh,
I mean, for me anyway. I don't dwell on the past. You know, they say don't look back. You're not going that way. It's just more like I won't do that going forward.
Okay.
You know, you could do that. Again, it's not as common now because you know we're grown up and well moved out of the house, but it still comes up from time to time, and so I don't think going back in time has really anything beneficial.
So no,
to
taking
come
responsibility
from it.
would matter to you at this age?
Not now.
Not now. Do you think in general that it's something worthwhile if parents do, if the evolved parent recognizes that their behavior in this way, making their kids a messenger, had an impact, to acknowledge that?
Yes, I think they could. I don't know if it'd make a difference, but just as long as they understand that. I know that my parents are not holding grudges against us for leaving one parent over the other, like, or not spending enough time, or, you know, whatever it is. But just to kind of internally think, okay, you know, this wasn't the best way to go about it. But again, you can't change the past, so let's just learn for the future, and hopefully not repeat it.
Yes.
Going forward.
Hopefully not repeated. You know better. When you know better, you do better, as Maya Angelou says, and we hope that's the case. All right. So let's now wrap this up a little bit, and I want you to give, like, you and your sister are now in charge of the rules of the game, and you've already said a lot in our conversation together, but I want you to summarize the top 3 new rules that parents must abide by when it comes to needing to communicate with one another. What would they be?
1, communicate with each other.
There you have it.
2, include the kids minimally. And when I say include the kids minimally, also it also means don't talk about it in front of them. So even, you know, if you're on the phone with the other spouse, go into a separate room. They don't have to hear it. Same thing with, you know, talking about it with other people if you're present. Just kind of keep your business separate. We don't need to know. That Number three, we don't need to know.
Okay.
We have absolutely nothing to do with it. We just want to spend time with you and be happy and loved. So just completely leave us out of it. And we don't need to know.
Well, if you could just look in that camera and just give a quick word to the children of divorce and let them know what it is you would want them to know and understand as they journey through this. Something really quick to the point for them.
Sure. Julie. As children of divorce, you obviously know that this divorce had nothing to do with you. And as I like to say, we didn't ask for this. But know that it does get better. And as long as you stay true to yourself and you are honest with your values and you also take responsibility for communicating openly with each parent, I think that that's the best way to do things. Just be honest, be open, and communicate.
And Julie, how can they reach you?
They could visit my website, www.bestwholeself.com, and you could email me at julie@bestwholeself.com.
And thank you again for being my guest today. And if you need to reach out to me, which I hope you will, please email me at Pamela Elaine Nichols @icloud.com. Join me next episode when my next guest describes the game Who's Dating Whom versus Tattletale Kids. Be sure to leave a comment and let me know one way you will play the divorce game differently so that your children can win. I'm Pamela Elaine Nichols again, and thank you so much for watching The Divorce Game.